The Demon Behind the Mirror. Part 1. I was just a normal kid living my life in the year 2004 when everything changed. I lived with my parents and little sister in an old house that had been in my family for a long time. The house was huge and had many rooms that were barely ever used. It was filled with antiques that my great-grandparents had brought back from their travels around the world. They had traveled all over the world and collected things like statues, jewelry, paintings, clothes, and random objects. Some of the stuff was valuable, but most of it was just junk. But because it was so old, my parents said we weren't allowed to touch any of it or throw anything out. One day while exploring the house, which I did quite often, I found a full-length mirror in one of the dusty rooms. I was only 8 years old at the time, but I knew that mirrors can sometimes show you things that aren't actually there. I was never particularly interested in mirrors, but something about this one seemed to pull me towards it. I tried to move it, but it wouldn't budge. I looked around the room to see if anyone was there, but I was alone. Then I noticed some writing on the wall next to the mirror. It was very faded, and I had to squint to read it. It said, "Beware what you see in the mirror, for it is not always what it seems." I thought it was just a warning for kids not to break the antique mirror. I didn't know that it was a real warning about the demon hiding behind it. From that day on, I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. It was almost like I was being drawn to it. At night, I would hear scratching sounds coming from behind the mirror. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see my black hair and pale white skin reflecting back at me. My heart would race as I wondered who I had become. Then one night I heard footsteps behind the mirror, and I knew I had to find out what was going on. I got out of bed and crept closer to the mirror. I peered into its dark depths and saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at me. I screamed and ran away. I tried to tell my parents about the demon, but they just laughed and told me it was a figment of my imagination. They said that old houses sometimes play tricks on your mind, so I kept quiet and went to sleep. But every night the footsteps grew louder and the red eyes burned into my brain. I was terrified to look into the mirror again, but I knew I had to face my fears. So one day I decided to confront the demon. I grabbed a hammer and broke the mirror, but instead of setting me free, it made things worse. As soon as the mirror was broken, the demon behind it let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house. The shards hit me and cut deep into my arms and legs. I fell to the floor and blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with my parents by my side. They told me that I had collapsed from exhaustion and had been hallucinating. They said the scratches on my body were self-inflicted and that I needed to get some rest. But I knew they were lying. They could see the demon too, but they were too afraid to admit it. I was released from the hospital a few days later and went back home, but I couldn't go back to my room because the mirror had been taken away and replaced with a new one. My parents said that they had thrown the old mirror away, but I knew they were lying. As soon as I stepped into my room, I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned around to look for the demon, but it was nowhere to be seen. I could feel its evil gaze burning into my back, and I knew it was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One night I was awoken to loud footsteps in my room. I turned to my window and saw that someone had left the window open. I closed it and tried to go back to sleep, but then I felt something cold brush against my neck. I screamed and ran out of the house. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't want to stay in that house another minute. I ran into the forest near my home and hid in the bushes until sunrise. I was scared and confused. I didn't understand why the demon was following me or what it wanted from me. After a while, I decided to go back home. I was hungry and thirsty, and I knew my parents would take care of me. But when I opened the front door, I saw something that made me gasp. My house looked completely different. The walls were painted a bright pink, and the furniture had been replaced with modern pieces. I asked my parents what had happened, but they looked at me like I was crazy. They said they had renovated the house, and that I must have been dreaming. I knew they were lying, but I didn't know what to do. I tried to convince them that the demon was still in the house, but they just took me to the hospital again. They told the doctors that I was having flashbacks and needed treatment, but this time the doctors agreed with me. They said that my parents were putting too much pressure on me, and that I needed to be away from them for a while. And now here I am sitting in this old abandoned asylum. I'm not sure how long I've been here. The doctors say I've been here for months, but it feels like years. I keep having flashbacks of the demon chasing me through the halls, and sometimes I even see it standing in the corner of my eye. I don't know if it's still after me or if it's finally left me alone. I've been trying to warn the others here about the demon, but they don't believe me. They think I'm just crazy and need more medication. But I know what I saw. I know that there is a demon loose in the world, and it's only a matter of time before it finds its next victim. If you're watching this, please believe me. If you see a mirror that looks old and dusty, stay away from it. The demon can't be killed. The only way to defeat it is to destroy the mirror that it's trapped behind. But be careful. When you break the mirror, it will try to escape and possess the first person it sees. You have to be strong and focus on destroying the mirror. Don't let the demon win. I don't know what happened to my parents. I hope they're safe, but I haven't heard from them since I came to the asylum. I miss them, but I also hate them for not believing me. I wish I could go back in time and warn them about the demon, but I can't. All I can do now is warn you. If you see an old mirror, stay away from it. The demon can't be killed. The only way to defeat it is to destroy the mirror that it's trapped behind. But be careful. When you break the mirror, it will try to escape and possess the first person it sees. You have to be strong and focus on destroying the mirror. Don't let the demon win. Now, I know what you're thinking. This story is obviously fake. A demon can't be hiding behind a mirror, right? Well, maybe not. But the scariest part of this story isn't the demon or the mirror. It's the fact that sometimes our greatest fears are real. Just because we can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. And sometimes the things that go bump in the night are scarier than we could ever imagine. So if you're watching this and you've seen a demon in the mirror, please leave a comment below. Let me know that you're not alone. We may never be able to defeat the demons in our lives, but we can at least comfort each other knowing that we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. I also have a channel where I share creepypastas and other scary stories. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Well, that's a relief. So your heart stops beating, your brain stops working, you stop breathing, and then you die. Well, not necessarily. There's one more thing. You see, when you're alive, you have about 37 trillion cells. But every now and again, one of them decides to stray from the program. This renegade cell mutates and divides, and it divides again and again and again until it forms a mass of thousands, even millions of cells. And this is where things get a bit awkward for doctors, because they don't actually know what is going on inside your body until they cut you open and look around. But there is one exception to this rule, and if we can figure out how to take advantage of it, we might just be able to help save your life. This is the last breath someone took before they died. It happened in an empty ward at a hospital in London in 2020. The patient was a 74-year-old woman with pancreatic cancer. She was admitted to the hospital because she was struggling to breathe. And that makes sense given that her cancer had spread to her lungs. But the weird thing is that after doctors put her on a ventilator, she stopped breathing on her own altogether. At first, they assumed she'd eventually start breathing on her own again once she was stable. But 2 days later, when her breathing still hadn't returned, they had to make a choice. Keep her on the ventilator, or let her die. They chose the former, and she lived for another week. But the entire time she never breathed on her own again. Now, normally, you don't want a patient to die on a ventilator, because that can cause all kinds of complications. So doctors tried everything to wean her off the machine. But those efforts only resulted in her taking a single, gasping breath every 3 minutes. Which isn't surprising given that each breath takes a lot of energy. When you breathe, your diaphragm contracts and moves downward, pulling air into your lungs. Meanwhile, muscles between your ribs expand your rib cage, creating negative pressure so your lungs can fill up. That takes energy. And the more energy it takes, the fewer breaths you'll take. The patient's scans showed that she had severe lung damage, which means it must have taken a Herculean effort to take even one breath every few minutes. And yet somehow, she managed. So why did her breathing stop in the first place? Well, her cancer may have had something to do with it. As cancer spreads through the body, it can put pressure on the nerves that control your breathing. In some cases, it can also physically block your windpipe. But none of these things were happening to her. Her cancer wasn't near the nerves that control breathing, and her windpipe was clear. Something else must have been going on, and doctors wouldn't have known unless they cut her open and looked inside her chest cavity. But here's the thing. It turns out you can tell a lot about what is happening inside your body without cutting it open. And all you need to do is listen very carefully to someone's breathing. And by listening, I mean recording and analyzing sound waves. When our patient was intubated, doctors recorded her breathing sounds, which revealed something unusual. The sound waves coming from her upper airways did unmatch what you'd expect to hear when someone is breathing. The sound waves of air moving through her windpipe weren't being dampened by her lungs. And that's weird because normally your lungs act like a sponge, soaking up the sound waves made by air moving through them. But something was preventing the waves from being dampened, and that something was inside her lungs. All they had to do was look inside to find out exactly what it was. When doctors performed a post-mortem examination, they found that both of her lungs were filled with fluid, which would explain why her breathing slowed down and why the sound waves weren't being dampened. The problem is that there is no easy way to tell whether someone has fluid in their lungs while they are still alive. It would be much easier if there was some other way to tell, like maybe there is some other part of the body that changes when you have fluid in your lungs. In the past, doctors used to routinely check for that by sticking a needle into someone's chest cavity and pulling out some of that oxygen and carbon dioxide-filled liquid. If it was blood-colored, then they knew the patient had a serious condition called pleural effusion, which is when fluid builds up in your chest cavity. But doing surgery to pull out fluid comes with its own risks, and there are other ways to detect fluid, such as scanning techniques that use X-rays or ultrasound waves. But these methods aren't always accurate, especially in patients who are critically ill. And sometimes even if you do spot fluid in a person's lungs, it's hard to know if it's causing any problems. Your lungs naturally produce a small amount of fluid and you swallow most of it without even realizing it. But researchers realized that the same technology used to record and analyze the patient's breathing could potentially monitor fluid in the lungs. If fluid in the lungs changes how breathing sounds, then you should be able to detect that change with the right algorithm. And that's exactly what they did. They compared sound recordings from patients with and without fluid in their lungs and created an algorithm that could tell the difference. They tested it on a bunch of recordings and it worked well. Then they got to work trying to figure out exactly what part of the breathing cycle was most indicative of fluid. And what they found is that it's not a single aspect of breathing, but rather the combination of several that makes it possible to detect fluid. In particular, the volume of air someone breathes in and out and how quickly they do it, as well as how long it takes them to exhale all of the air out of their lungs. It seems counterintuitive, but having fluid in your lungs causes you to breathe faster and more shallowly, which expels more air than usual during exhalation. Meanwhile, you take smaller breaths because the fluid makes it harder to expand your lungs fully. And if you can detect these subtle changes in breathing patterns, you can warn doctors that there may be fluid in the lungs and potentially save lives. It turns out that breathing is a lot more informative than doctors originally thought. All it takes is figuring out what to listen for, and that's okay. Not every research project pans out. Sometimes experiments give you unexpected results that lead you in new directions. And sometimes you learn something so interesting that you just have to share it with the world. And that's what we do here. We share cool stuff we've learned about the world that might not have turned into anything if it hadn't been shared. If you want to support us making more of this cool stuff, consider becoming a patron. Our patrons get access to our monthly podcast and the chance to ask us any questions they want. And we've been digging into some of the patrons' questions lately. One patron asked if dogs experience grief, another asked, how do you know you're dreaming, and another wanted to know how memory works. We answered all these questions and more on our March podcast, which you can listen to right now if you're a patron. And if you're not a patron, you can still listen. Just wait until April. That's when the podcast goes live for everyone. Have you ever seen a cemetery that moves? Probably not, right? But there is one in Indonesia, and it's not just any cemetery. It's for criminals who are buried with their coffins made of concrete. So what's so interesting about this place? Stick around till the end to find out. Before we get into the details, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. The videos here cover a wide range of topics from science and technology to history and culture. Located in Indonesia, this eerie cemetery seems like something straight out of a horror movie. Imagine rows upon rows of graves moving closer together at an alarming rate. Well, this isn't fiction, this is reality. What makes this even more creepy is the fact that these graves contain the bodies of people convicted of serious crimes, including murderers. But why do they move? How does this happen? Before we reveal the secrets behind this mysterious phenomenon, let's take a moment to explore the history of the cemetery itself. Established in 1986, this burial ground was created due to the overcrowding of prisons in the area. Instead of keeping these prisoners incarcerated after their death, the Indonesian government decided to bury them in this remote location outside of Jakarta. At first, everything seemed fine. The cemetery became a place where society could lay the convicted criminals to rest, believing that they wouldn't come back to haunt us. But little did anyone know that these concrete coffins would eventually start moving. What's the reason behind these constantly moving graves? Is there some supernatural force at play? Or is there a more rational explanation? Let's delve deeper into this perplexing mystery. One of the most common questions people have about this cemetery is why the graves are built in such close proximity to one another. After all, it's not typical to place coffins just a few inches apart. The answer lies in the design of the cemetery itself. The architects behind this project had a unique approach, opting for efficiency over tradition. Instead of the typical single occupancy per grave, this cemetery was designed to hold multiple bodies in a limited space. As you can imagine, this practice raised many eyebrows at the time. People wondered about the ethics of burying multiple individuals in the same grave, not to mention the potential consequences. Did they consider the possibility that these graves might move, or were they just trying to save space? Fast forward to today, and we have our answer. These graves are indeed moving, causing many to question the logic of the initial design. It seems like a nightmare scenario straight out of a horror film, but it's very real. Another intriguing aspect of this cemetery is the choice of material used for the construction of the graves. Unlike traditional wooden coffins, these bodies are encased in solid concrete, making it difficult to move them once they're in place. So why go through the trouble of burying people in concrete coffins, only to have those coffins moved later on? It turns out that the decision to use concrete was made for a very practical reason. The Indonesian government wanted to prevent the bodies from being stolen and also to discourage people from vandalizing the graves. After all, stealing bodies for rituals or other purposes is not unheard of in some parts of the world. By using concrete, they thought they could put an end to this problem. However, they may have underestimated the determination of some individuals. Despite the solid concrete, these graves are still being moved, leaving many to wonder how on earth people are able to do this. So how exactly are these graves being moved? The process is actually quite simple, yet quite disturbing when you think about it. Each grave consists of 3 sections, allowing for 3 bodies to be buried in one spot. The top section is designed to be removed, revealing the 2 graves underneath. When someone decides to move a grave, all they have to do is lift the top portion of the concrete slab and slide it away. This exposes the coffin below, which can then be dug up and relocated elsewhere. While this may seem easy enough, it's important to remember that we're dealing with human remains here. The thought of someone's final resting place being so casually disturbed is unsettling, to say the least. It raises ethical questions about how we treat the dead, especially those who were once considered enemies of the state. The process of exhuming a body from one of these graves is not only disturbing, but also dangerous. The individuals buried here were often high-profile criminals who died violent deaths. Imagine the potential health risks of disturbing their remains decades after their demise. Nevertheless, people have been known to dig up these bodies, leading to a number of disturbing discoveries. Some have found bullet holes in the corpses, providing clues to the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Others have stumbled upon personal belongings that help piece together the stories of these long-dead criminals. One can only wonder why anyone would want to disturb these graves in the first place. Is it out of morbid curiosity, a desire to pay respects, or something else entirely? Whatever the motivation, it's clear that these graves are not resting in peace. But why are people doing this? What's the reason behind disturbing these graves? To understand the motives behind disturbing these graves, we need to look no further than the individuals buried within them. The cemetery serves as a final resting place for some of Indonesia's most notorious criminals, individuals who were feared and loathed during their lifetimes. When someone is involved in a large number of killings, it's not uncommon for people to seek retribution even after they're dead. In some cases, families of the victims may feel a sense of closure by unearthing the body and perhaps even destroying it. Additionally, there's a certain morbid curiosity that surrounds these graves. People may be fascinated by the idea of seeing the final resting place of such notorious criminals, or they may want to collect souvenirs from the gravesite. This could explain why some people have been known to dig up bodies and remove portions of their bones as keepsakes. While this may seem shocking and disrespectful, it's important to remember that these are human beings who once walked this earth. They had families and friends who loved them, even if they also committed heinous acts. It's natural for people to be curious about those who lived such different lives than themselves. And while we may not condone digging up graves, we can understand the motivations that drive people to do such things. Another factor contributing to the disturbance of these graves is the lack of proper maintenance. Over time, the concrete covering the graves may deteriorate, making it easier for people to access the coffins below. Additionally, the Indonesian government has limited resources to monitor and maintain all of its cemeteries, especially those located in remote areas. This lack of oversight has allowed people to take matters into their own hands and disturb these graves without facing any consequences. The situation is further complicated by the stigma surrounding the cemetery itself. Many people are afraid to work there due to the nature of the crimes committed by those buried within its grounds. This fear of working at the cemetery contributes to the lack of maintenance and ultimately leads to more graves being disturbed. As you can see, there are many factors that contribute to the ongoing issue of graves being moved and bodies being dug up. From a desire for retribution to the lack of proper maintenance, these cemeteries are far from resting in peace. This leads us to the next: why don't the Indonesian authorities just seal the graves permanently? Wouldn't this solve the problem of graves being dug up and moved? Well, the answer is not so simple. The process of permanently sealing these graves would require significant effort and resources. The Indonesian government would need to invest in reinforced concrete slabs that can withstand any attempts to dig them up. This would not only be costly, but also time-consuming to implement. Additionally, there are religious and cultural beliefs in Indonesia that may complicate the matter further. Some families may not agree to have their loved ones buried in sealed graves, believing that it goes against their religious customs. The government would need to find a way to balance the need for security with the religious rights of the deceased and their families. Moreover, there's the issue of public perception. Some people may view permanently sealing the graves as a sign of disrespect towards the dead. They argue that these are individuals who were once part of society and should be treated with dignity, even if they committed crimes. Ultimately, the decision of how to proceed with these graves is a complex one that involves many stakeholders. The Indonesian government must weigh the costs and benefits of permanently sealing the graves, while also considering the religious and cultural beliefs of the people. It's a delicate balance that requires careful consideration and planning. In conclusion, this eerie cemetery in Indonesia serves as a reminder that death is never truly permanent. The graves may be moved, but the memories of those buried within them live on. Whether it's due to a desire for retribution, morbid curiosity, or simply a lack of respect, people continue to dig up these graves, unearthing secrets that were best left buried, while the Indonesian government grapples with how to prevent further disturbances. One thing is certain: these graves will continue to move.